Resourceful Designer, episode 139, Freelancing as a Side Gig.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. He was a competitive backstroke swimmer in his youth, but never won a meet. Mark Dakot.
Welcome to the show. And this week, I talk about running a home-based design business part-time and what you need to know. I also share my favorite color picker as the resource of the week, before ending with a great question from Landon, also about choosing color palettes. Now, it's been a pretty steady week for me. I haven't had any new jobs come in, no new emails or phone calls from existing or new clients, but that gave me lots of time to catch up a little bit on some of my existing work. I had a lot of stuff on the go, completed a couple of little jobs, finished off formatting that book that I had told you about, as well as did a little bit of artwork for some podcasts, and just keep plugging away on a couple of websites I'm doing. Now, I did take a few minutes yesterday when I just wasn't in the mood to do anything. You know those times. You're at your computer and you know you should be designing, but you're really not in the mood. Well, I took some time to clean up my computer's desktop. Well, I don't know about you, but sometimes my computer desktop can get just as messy as my physical desktop. Looking down at my desk right now, my physical desk, and I've got books and papers and pens and all sorts of stuff all over it, and it's just the way I work. I know some people cringe at that idea, but I've always been like that. I've always had a messy desk, and my computer's desktop is no different. I must have had a couple of hundred icons and folders all over there, so I spent some time yesterday cleaning it up, and I got it down to about a dozen. I've got about a dozen folders and a couple of icons on there, and to me, that's clean. It might not be to you. You might be somebody who doesn't want anything at all on their desktop, but I just need some of the frequently used folders and items I have on there. And I'm quite happy now with a lot of the stuff I got rid of. It just came down to file management, putting them where they really should be. And a few of them, it was just a matter of, it might have been an article that I wanted to read and I just copied it to the desktop to save it for later. Well, I either read the article, decided I no longer needed to read the article, or if it was something that still looked interesting, but I didn't want to take the time to read it right then, I just saved it into Evernote and then deleted the icon off my desk. So I was happy to get that little bit done. You know, that's one of the things when you're running a business, or even when you're not running a business, just there's some days where you just don't feel like doing actual work. And sometimes getting a little task like that, cleaning up your desktop, is a little win regardless of what you've been doing. Now, I'd like to share a resource of the week with you, and this is one that I've shared in the past, but I'm going to bring it back just because I love this site so much. And this is the site Coolors, COOLORS.co. And this is my favorite website for picking colors. It's a super fast color scheme generator, and I don't know what kind of AI they have running in the background because anything it generates, I think, are just great color combinations. I've never seen anything that I just go, ooh, those two colors together, really? That's never really happened. There's been some color palettes that I'd go, oh, I don't really like that palette. But when you look at the overall palette, the colors actually work really well together. It just might not be a palette I would choose. But I love Coolors just for the simplicity of it. All you do is you load it up, you keep pressing the space bar until you find something that you like. Now, I had to do this just a couple of days ago. There's a new website I'm working on and I'm trying to figure out a color scheme. And I knew it was going to be kind of an earth tony type thing. It's kind of, they do kitchen renovations and that sort of thing. And their main color is a brown. So I knew I was starting with that. And what's great is you just press the space bar. And every time you press the space bar on this site, the colors change. And once you find a color that you like, you can lock it so that that one stops changing and the other ones will readjust to be colors that work well with that one you locked. And as you lock more and more, the other ones keep working that way. So I was able to find a really, really cool palette. I stuck with the kind of shade of gray that they're used to. It was already in their branding to begin with. So I used that gray. Did I say gray? I meant brown. Sorry, the color palette that I chose had gray in it. It was a brown that I started with, and then I used a gray to mimic a silvery color as the secondary. Then I used a slate blue and then a different shade of blue. And then I went with a creamy color as the last one. Now this palette, this website allows you to pick 5 colors. Every once in a while I'll be working on a palette and I wish I had a 6th color for it to choose from. But most of the time, if that's the case, I'll just pick a 6th color on my own. But it's never let me down when I've been trying to choose a color. Now, what I love about it is once you have a color picked and you can move around, choose the other colors. As I said, you just keep hitting the space bar and it'll keep generating new colors, but they're all colors that work with the ones that you have locked. And if you want, say there's a color that pops up, like in the case of the gray, a gray did pop up, but it wasn't the right one. So I was able to go in and readjust it. You can adjust colors. You can refine their temperature, their hue, their saturation, their brightness, and some other stuff as well. So I just changed, I adjusted the hue of the color. I wanted it to be a little bit lighter than the one they gave. And once I had the one I wanted, I locked it in. And then I was able to get the other colors in line by just keep hitting the space bar until I found stuff that I liked and I locked them. Now, what I love about this website is once you're registered, you can save your palettes for easy access. I can go back and see all the websites that I've created color palettes for are all there. So if I ever need to know what colors I used for a certain client, I could just go back to that site and they're all available. Now, Coolors, again, Coolors at coolors.co, is also available as an iOS app and an Android app. Now, I haven't tried the apps. I always use the desktop version, but I did notice on their website when I was copying down some information for today's episode that they do have apps available for you to pick colors directly in the apps. And the other thing that's neat that I didn't know they had, and which I'm going to be implementing, is they have an add-on for Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator so that you can display your palettes directly in those 2 programs. So if you're working in Photoshop, you can open up your palettes window and load the palettes directly from the website. So anything you have saved, I mentioned how you can save your stuff, all your saved palettes, including all the pre-generated palettes the website has to offer, are all available directly in Photoshop and Illustrator for you to use. I didn't even know about that. What I was doing is I was always just taking a screenshot of them and then opening up the screenshot in Photoshop and using the eyedropper tool to get the right color. But this will make it so much easier. So anyways, I just wanted to bring that up. I have mentioned it before in the podcast, but it's been a long time and you may not remember, you may not have listened to the episode that I talked about this resource. It is a great one. It is my favorite. It's my go-to whenever I need colors or I need a palette, especially for a website. My first visit is always coolors.co, and that's coolors.co. So give it a try. And now, freelancing as a side gig. The reason I created this podcast was to help you in running your home-based design business. And most of the time, I discuss topics that I choose from a point of view that you're running your design business full time. That's what I do, so I just presume that that's what you're doing as well. But the truth of the matter is, a large number of the people that listen to this podcast are not full-time freelancers or full-time design business owners. Many of you have maybe a full-time job or a part-time job, and you're freelancing or running your design business on the side. Maybe you work for a design agency, or maybe you're an in-house designer dreaming of going it alone one day. Or maybe you're like Josee. He's a listener who emailed me not too long ago. Hi, Josee. Thanks for listening. Josee is a full-time firefighter, and he has a spark of creativity. He said he's always been a creative person, but he's a firefighter. And he told me that he started off one day when their fire hall, they were doing some sort of event and they needed a poster, and he offered to design it. So he designed the poster for the fire hall. And when his coworkers saw how well it turned out, and they asked him to start designing stuff for themselves. He even designed the wedding invitation for one of his coworkers. Well, eventually word got out because of his coworkers talking, and he started picking up more and more work on the side. And eventually, he started a part-time design business. Now, Josee has no intention of quitting being a firefighter. He's very happy with that, and I'm sure it comes with a nice pension, so that's a nice thing to have as well. But he has that creative spark, and he's running his design business as a side gig, and he's very happy with that. So your full-time job may not have anything to do with design at all. Now, maybe you're listening right now, and you're a student. Maybe you take on some side projects to earn a little bit of spending money. We all know how difficult it is for students to have money to spend. So maybe you're taking on a few little design projects to earn some money while you're learning the trade. Or maybe you're listening right now because you're a student exploring your options for after you graduate. You want to know what's out there, what sort of jobs are available, and running your own business is an option, and you're exploring that. And that's why you're listening to the podcast. And I'm sure some of you listening have not started any kind of side hustle yet. The reason you're listening to the podcast is because the idea of working for yourself appeals to you, but maybe you're not quite there yet. It's something you'd like to do maybe in the near future or maybe far down the road, but you haven't taken the leap. Well, regardless of what your situation is or why you're listening to the podcast, I want you to know that there are a good number of listeners that are in the exact same boat as you, regardless of what that boat is. And that's why I wanted to talk today about things you need to take into consideration when you're deciding to freelance as a side gig. And yes, if you've been with the podcast for a while, you know that I don't like the term freelance or freelancer. But in this case, often that's exactly what you are doing. If you're just doing this on the side while you're running a full-time, or not running, while you have a full-time job and you're taking on some design projects here and there, that's exactly what you're doing is freelancing. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is time management. When you're working full-time for yourself, you're in complete control of your schedule. You have 24 hours each and every day to divide up how you see fit. You decide how long you want to sleep. You decide how long you want to work. You decide how much time to put aside for leisure. You have the whole day to schedule how you want. If there's a networking event going on at 10 a.m. on Thursday and you'd like to attend it, no problem. You just work it into your schedule. If you look at the forecast and it's calling for rain later today and you know that your lawn needs to be mowed, you can go out and do it right now and just decide to put in an extra hour tonight if you do need to catch up on anything. If you're working the midnight oil to complete a project, no worries. You can make up that time by sleeping in a little bit tomorrow. When you're working full-time for yourself, a home-based designer, your schedule is very flexible. However, when you're running your design business as a side gig to your full-time, or maybe it's simply another part-time job, that flexibility is drastically diminished. There are a lot less hours in the day for you to work with. And that could translate into sacrificing things like leisure time or even sleep to your side hustle, especially if you have deadlines that you need to meet. Clients don't really care if you run a business full-time or part-time or just casual, as long as their jobs are done on time when they need it. And sometimes, in order to meet those deadlines, you will have to give up rest and relaxation time and time with family and friends. Now, it's not that bad if you're single, but if you have a significant other or if you have children, then your partner or your kids won't like playing second string to your design work. So figuring out how you're going to manage your time is crucial if you're freelancing on the side, much more so than somebody like myself who's running the business full time. Now, the second thing you need to consider is the size of the work you take on, or the scope, I should say, of the work you take on. And obviously, this is one of the solutions to the whole time management issue I was just talking about, is the size of these projects. If your available time to design is a couple of hours in the evening and maybe a few hours each weekend, you might not want to take on any large projects with tight deadlines that require lots and lots of hours. Or let me rephrase that. You may want to take them on, but maybe you shouldn't take them on. In episodes 42 and in episodes 134 of the podcast, I talked about turning away design work and saying no to design work and to clients. If you're running your design business as a side gig, I highly suggest you bookmark those 2 episodes, or better yet, download the Resourceful Designer app and add them to your favorites list, because you'll be wanting to re-listen to them again in the future. Because inevitably, you will end up having to turn down work because of time constraints if you're just doing this part-time. When running a part-time, or some may even call it casual time, when running a part-time design business, you need to know your limits. How much time do you have? Or better yet, how much time don't you have to devote to new design projects? Yes, you can always hire help with big jobs, but when you're doing so, it requires time that you need to devote to overseeing the parts of the projects you hand off. So you might not be doing them, but you still need to take the time to oversee them because you are managing those people as well. So be very careful with what projects you take on when you're only doing this part-time. Sometimes it's just not worth the stress of taking on the project. And clients will understand if you tell them you're not ready or you can't take on a project of that size. Now, the third point I want to touch on is the extra income you get from freelancing part-time. And I want to touch on this one briefly. You see, one of the biggest fears holding designers back from taking that leap to becoming a full-time entrepreneur is the uncertainty of the income they're going to get. There are no guarantees of income when you're working for yourself. It's a roller coaster ride the entire time. Some months will be very lucrative, and some months nothing is coming in. And giving up a steady paycheck that you get every week or every other week for that sort of life is really scary. Now, one of the mistakes that I hear people making when they're thinking about one day doing this full time, they start a side gig part-time while they have a full-time job, and they're thinking that one day I'll transition to working from home. And one of the mistakes they make is they decide that once their side gig's income is equal to their current job's income, then they'll be ready to quit their job and work full-time for themselves. Because in their mind, what's the difference? Once the part-time job or your side gig is making the same amount of money as your regular job, you're all set. Just quit your regular job and keep on going. And in case you're wondering how it's possible for your side gig's income to equal or even surpass your full-time income, just a few episodes ago in episode 136, which was titled, How Much Should You Charge for Your Design Services?, I talked about how the low overhead of working from home and setting good design rates can mean equaling or even surpassing your weekly paycheck income with only a handful of hours of work required. So go back and listen to that episode if you're curious about that. The thing is, this scenario of waiting for your side gig's income to equal that of your full-time job works great as long as you don't spend any of the money you earn from your side gig. Now, that may sound strange, but that's the only way this can actually succeed. If you put all the money that you make with your side gig and you put it into savings and you continue to live off just the money you get from your full-time job, just that weekly or bi-weekly paycheck that you get, live just off that and don't touch any of the money from your side gig, then you will be okay. Because when you decide it's time to make the leap, first of all, you'll have a great financial buffer because all that money you saved, it'll be there to hold you over just in case the whole transition period to working for yourself is slow going at first. You'll have money to draw from. And if your side gig income keeps going the way it had been, it'll be a realistic transition from one job to the other. The mistake people often make in thinking once my side gig's income equals my current job's income, I'll be ready to quit my job and work full-time for myself, is when they use their side gig's income as extra income all along. Think about it. If you make, let's use a nice round number, $25,000 per year in your day job, your regular full-time job, the paycheck you get weekly or bi-weekly or whatever, you're making $25,000. And you work up your side gig to the point where you're actually making $25,000 per year on your side gig. And you're thinking, wow, it's equal, now I can quit. But in actuality, if you are spending that money as you're making it, you're actually making $50,000 a year because you've got the $25,000 from your regular job and the $25,000 from your side gig. And when you quit your day job, you're actually cutting your income in half if you've grown used to using that extra income from your side gig. And that can come as quite a blow. I've heard of some people that never took that into consideration. And all of a sudden they're struggling and they're saying, I don't understand. I was making really good money. Yeah, but you were actually living off 2 salaries at that point that you were earning. So I'm not saying you shouldn't use or you shouldn't spend your side gig income. If that's all it's ever going to be is a side gig and you never plan on taking it full time, then there's no big deal in here and you can just ignore this entire section. I just wanted you to be aware that if your goal is to build up your side business to the point where it can become your full-time job, be aware of the consequences, especially if you're living off both your regular job salary and your side gig salary, because when you leave your regular job, you will be cutting your salary in half, or maybe not half exactly, but you will be cutting a large portion of your income out, and you have to be okay with that. Now, the fourth and final thing I want to talk about is conflict of interest. If you're working for a design agency or a design studio or a commercial printer or any employer in the design sector, you need to be aware that starting a side gig may be a conflict of interest. Now, some companies do make you sign papers when you're hired, making you agree not to start a business on the side. Now, not every company does. There are some, I've heard of that before. But even if they don't, starting a business on the side that's in essence a competitor to your employer is not a good thing. And don't think you can do it. Just say, oh, well, I'll do it on the side and nobody will find out. Somebody will find out eventually, and it could land you in hot water. Now, some of you may not know my full story. I worked in the design department of a commercial printer for 15 years before finally quitting to run my own design business. What you may not know is that for 15 months, I ran my business as a side gig while I was still working at the printer. So let me go back and give you a brief history of Mark Dakot. So back in the mid-90s, the World Wide Web was just taking off. Now, wanting to be at the forefront of this, the printing company I worked at decided that they wanted a website. Not many companies at the time had websites. They decided they wanted one. So I thought this was very interesting, and I took it upon myself to learn what I could at the time in order to build a website for the company. Now, going back and using Adobe PageMill, how many of you old-timers out there remember Adobe PageMill? Well, that's what I used to build my very first website. And over the next year or two, I revised it when SiteMill came out and we were able to do a little bit more with Adobe SiteMill. I built a new website and so forth. Now, in the late 90s, as the buzz for websites started to get out and more companies decided that we should get on the bandwagon and get our own website, some of our printing clients that were coming into the print shop to get stuff done started asking about websites and where they can get them. And knowing that I was able to do websites, because I had done a couple for the print shop by that time, management at the print shop decided that this would be a great service to offer to kind of draw people in. And being the only person there that know how to do websites, it fell upon me. Now, when I say I was designing websites back then, it was very few and far between. I would do maybe 2 per year. If I was lucky, 3 per year, but chances are it was 1 or 2 per year I would end up doing. But as the internet picked up steam and more people wanted websites, I did start getting busier and busier creating them. And I loved designing websites, and I thought doing more and more of them was great. But what I didn't know is that my employer didn't feel the same as I did. Now, you have to understand the mentality of a print shop. The reason for a print shop's existence is to print things. When the printing presses are running, they're making money. When the printing presses are not running, they're not making money, or at least that's the mentality they have. The design department that I worked in was there for the sole purpose to facilitate things by designing stuff for our clients that were then printed. To management, it didn't matter that the client was also paying for the design services. In fact, we were often seen as a loss leader, meaning if prices had to be cut somewhere in order to win a large printing order from another printing company, it was almost guaranteed that it would be the design costs that would get cut. I know there were many projects that I worked on where I was in essence designing for free for the clients. I mean, I was being paid my salary, but the client wasn't paying for any of the design I was doing. The shop, instead was making up for it on the printing side. And the problem with web design is there's no printing involved. So when I first started offering this service and I was doing 1 or 2 websites per year, management didn't really mind. As I said, they did it more as a loss leader. It was a way to bring clients in the door. And then once they were in to do the websites, then they could offer them printing services. And chances are, once you're dealing with a company, you're going to keep dealing with that company. So once they were dealing with us for a website, then chances are, if they wanted business cards or brochures or letterhead or whatever, they would use our services as well. So it was a way to get new clients in the door. Obviously, as time went by and websites became more and more popular, I started working on more and more of them. And it got to the point where I was doing maybe 1 or 2 a month. And this would be, I'm talking the early 2000s here. And again, unbeknownst to me, management didn't like this because anytime I was working on a website, I was not feeding the printing presses. So around, I'd say 2002, 2003, I don't remember the exact time, but around that time, they decided that they were no longer going to offer web design as a service. So they cut it out of what they were offering. Now, they did say to their existing web clients, they would continue to manage the websites, but they wouldn't be designing any new ones. Either for existing clients, if they wanted a new website design, we wouldn't be doing it, and we wouldn't be taking on any new clients. We would just manage if they needed some updates or some small changes to an existing site. But if they wanted a lot of changes done, then we would tell them they would have to find somebody else. Now, by that time, the whole web design thing bug had bit me. I loved it. So that's when I got the idea to start doing them myself from home. I sat down with my manager one day and I told him what I wanted to do. I says, listen, if you're not offering the service anymore, I'd like to keep doing it, but I'll do it in the evenings and on weekends. And the manager actually saw this as an opportunity. He said that he would continue to offer or leave web design listed as one of the services we offer in order to draw people in, and anybody who wanted a website would just be referred to me. Now, of course, he said that I wouldn't be allowed to discuss websites with them during our business hours because I would have to be designing stuff to, again, feed the presses. But I was free to at least meet the client, get an initial contact, and arrange a time to meet with them after work hours, either on the weekend or in the evening. So, without knowing anything about running a design business, I started taking on web clients from home. Not a lot of them, but I did start. Now, by this time, by the time I started working from home in the evenings and on weekends, there were some other web design companies in town, some established companies. And obviously, some clients preferred work with them than someone who, quote unquote, dabbled at it in the evenings. So a lot of the clients I met with never ended up hiring me. But I did slowly get going, and things did pick up to the point where in February of 2005, I registered my business and made it official. I was a solopreneur. Now, why am I telling you this whole history of how I got started in a section called Conflict of Interest? It's because of what happened next. As I started getting more and more web clients, and just like any design business will, those clients will start talking to more people, and your business grows through referrals. So suddenly, I was getting new clients that weren't coming from the print shop. They were coming from word-of-mouth referrals, or just from whatever reason, they weren't coming from the print shop. And some of those clients started asking me for some other things. Some of them needed logos for their website. Some of them wanted business cards, brochures, posters, whatever. If they were starting a new business, they needed everything, and they were asking me to do that. Now, this is the conflict of interest for me because that was the sort of thing that I did at the print shop. If I took those projects on in the evenings and on weekends, I would be in direct competition with my employer for that sort of work. So I told my clients that, yeah, I'd be happy to do your logo or your business card or your brochure, all that, but I can only do it at the print shop. So if you come meet with me there, I will be happy to do it, but you will be doing it through the print shop. But the problem was, some of these people already did business with one of the other print shops in town and didn't want to deal with another one just for this. And this was a dilemma for me. So I actually went and I had a meeting with my manager at the print shop and told him about all this. And we came to the agreement that he said it was okay for me to design logos for my clients because, yes, a website did require a logo. And if they didn't have a logo, I could design the logo for them. But I could not design any material that would be printed, which I thought was reasonable. And it did work out. I started designing logos on the side to go on these websites, and then I would give the logo to the client and they would take it wherever they want to have their stuff done. And at first I was happy, but then what started happening was I would see business cards or flyers or brochures or posters around town that had the logo I designed on them, but the rest of the stuff wasn't my design. And believe it or not, I started to resent that. It's like I'm looking at this stuff and I'm saying that's a job I could have easily done. And some of the work I looked at and I thought I could have done a better job than that. And this was stuff I was turning away because it was a conflict of interest with my day job. And it was becoming a regular occurrence where people were asking me for this stuff and I had to turn it away. So just over a year later, after discussing with my wife, I decided that this work that I was turning away was enough extra income for me to make it on my own, or with the help of course, my wife had her salary, so we weren't going to be just living off what I had. But we made the decision, and in May of 2006, I resigned from the print shop, and I've never regretted that decision. So I've been running my business officially since February of 2005. But I've been running it full time since May of 2006. And I really don't know when I took on my first client before I registered my business. I know it was back in 2003 or beginning of 2004 or something like that when I took on my first client at home. But that I didn't have a registered business then. So I officially say my business was registered in February of 2005. So this whole long-winded story of how I got started in this was simply to tell you to watch out for conflicts of interest between what you are doing in your side gig and what you do for your employer. Make sure before you start anything on the side that you haven't signed any papers preventing you from running your own business on the side, or that you've signed anything stating that whatever you create while employed, regardless of if you do it at the office or at home, belongs to your employer. Some companies do have that clause that as long as you are a designer working for them, whatever you design, regardless of where you design it, belongs to them. So if you start a side gig and you design something for a client and you've signed one of those agreements with your employer, in essence, your employer owns the copyright for that material, which means it's not yours to hand over to the client. So your employer legally would be able to go to that client and say, you can't use that logo. It belongs to us. You have to pay us. Even though you've paid so-and-so to design it, you now owe us for the copyright. Now, things like that could be very messy. So be sure, whatever employer, and even if your employer is not in the design field and you think, well, that doesn't apply to me. Like say Jose's case where he's a firefighter and he says, well, that doesn't apply to me. Be careful with whatever you sign anytime you have an employer. I have a friend of mine. He's not in the design field. He's an insurance salesman. And he decided to start a hobby farm. He had a lot of acreage where he was, and he decided to raise pigs, and he was going to sell the meat. Well, he didn't realize that when he signed on to become an insurance agent, he actually signed a sheet of paper that said that he would not run any other business while he worked for this company. And that included a hobby farm where he was just raising pigs on his own and he was selling the meat to friends and family and all that. It was considered a business and he had to shut down. It was either that or leave the insurance business. And he decided to stick with the insurance business because it was a lot more lucrative. But it just goes to show you that it doesn't matter where you're working, even if you don't work for a design-related company, be careful that you haven't signed something that states that you will not start a business on the side. Because if that's the case, then you have to quit that job before you start your side gig. And even if there is nothing that you've signed, no legal documents preventing you from any of this, it's still your responsibility to make sure that whatever creative endeavors you do from home isn't potentially taking money away from the company that you are working for. Now, I'm not a lawyer and I can't say for sure, but I believe that if you are doing something that your employer could be making money from and you're doing it on the side, making money on your own, they may have grounds to sue you for that income or for copyright or for whatever. So be very careful with that. Watch out for conflicts of interest. So those were the 4 points I wanted to cover. Time management, being careful of the size of the work you take on, how you view the extra income you're getting from your design business, and of course, the conflict of interest between your quote-unquote day job and your evening and weekend job. Now, I know that those 4 things, I was giving a lot of warnings there, but there is a lot of great that can come from having a side gig. There is no reason really for you to have to take it full time if you don't want to. There are some very successful people that do it as a side business. Take Ian Paget, for example. You may know him as Logo Geek. He has a huge following on social media. He has the Logo Geek podcast and the Logo Geek Facebook community. Ian is very well known in the logo design circle, and yet he only runs his business a couple of days a week. I believe that he still works for his old employer 3 days a week. It used to be a full-time job, and now he's cut back that he's only doing it part-time. I believe it's 3 days a week that he works there. And his other time is spent on his business doing logo design. So it just goes to show you that you can succeed in doing it part-time or maybe running both part-time. And that's always an option as well. If you have a full-time job and you decide you want to start a side business, you can always go to your employer and say, listen, I know I'm working full-time. I'd like to cut back to a part-time position. Go from instead of 5 days a week, work 3 days a week, and that'll free up some time for you to do some stuff at home like Ian did. So I want you to enjoy your freelancing side gig for whatever it is. Whether it's a simple side hustle to bring in maybe a little bit of extra income, maybe it's a lucrative pastime to unleash your creative side. Maybe you're doing it as dip your toe in the water to see if the entrepreneurial life is something you want. Or maybe you've decided that it is, and your side gig is a stepping stone to your new career as a full-time home-based designer. Do whatever works for you. And if you're not already taking on design projects on the side, I highly encourage you to give it a try. Start off slowly. Do some small jobs for family and friend, and then move up and acquire real clients. That's the only way you'll know if this life is for you. And I have a feeling, like most designers that I know that have taken this leap, that once you give it a go, you'll be hooked. So are you running your design business part-time only? Or have you not started yet? You're still on the fence and thinking about starting your business. Please, I would love to know. Leave me a comment for this episode by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 139. And now, this week's question. And this week's question comes in from Landon. It says, I was just wondering how you select color palettes for websites and brands. I'm aware of a boatload of tools out there, but are there some rules of thumb I should keep in mind? Well, thanks for the question, Landon. And it just so happens yours was the next question in line, and I didn't even realize that whenever I chose the resource of the week, which was coolers.co. But I'll just quickly go over a couple of other options as far as choosing color palettes. I mentioned Coolers at the beginning. There's also Adobe Color, which is color.adobe.com, and that's color with no U, the American spelling, so color.adobe.com. And I want to mention one more that is by CSS Drive, which is called the Color Palette Generator, which you can find if you go to cssdrive.com. It's under their Tools menu, and it's called Image to Color Palette Tool. And what this one allows you to do is you upload any photo, and it creates a color palette based on the colors in the photo. So if your client has a certain, image they want to use, or if there's a product, well, you can go in and actually pull colors from that photo. So it does a really good job at that. Now, I know Coolers has an option like that too, but I really like the one from CSS Drive. So those are 3 tools, but you say, Landon, that you already know of a boatload of tools, to quote what you said. But is there some rule of thumb to keep in mind when choosing a color palette? Well, okay, these are what I like. First of all, whenever you're choosing a color palette for, say, a website, I like to pick between 4 and 6 colors. 5 ultimate, I'll have the main color, an accent color, and then I'll have a couple of other colors that I use for various parts. Like if I'm going to do a call to action box or something like that, I might want it in another complementary color to what's used on the website. So I usually like to pick between 4 and 6. As I mentioned, Coolers and Adobe Color allows you to pick 5 colors, which is generally where I'll go. But every once in a while, like as I mentioned, the website that I used Coolers for earlier this week, I wanted a 6th color for something. So I went in manually and picked the 6th color for it. But as far as rule of thumb for when you're picking colors, obviously if the company or whoever you're working for has a color palette already for their brand, if they have their logo, even if you ask them, like, do you have a color palette? And they say, no, we don't. Well, chances are there's colors in their logo. I would use that as a base, sometimes using the exact colors. And sometimes you might use something slightly different. Like say if it's a blue color, I might use a shade of blue that complements their blue color, but not the exact same shade. I might go with a darker or lighter, depending on the option, and use that as my base color. Now, anytime I choose a color palette, I always have one color in mind to start with. I usually have an idea if I'm going to start off with a blue or a red or a brown or a green, and I have a good idea of what that one color I want to be. Once I choose that color, then it's just a matter of finding colors that kind of complement it. And this is where good color theory comes in. If you can look at an actual color wheel and start to know where your primary colors are and their complementary colors. So I will often look at something like if I'm doing a website and it's predominantly blue, well, I know that blue's complementary color is orange. So I will often choose an orange palette to go with a blue palette. Or vice versa. If you look on the Resourceful Designer website, Resourceful Designer's main color is orange, but my highlight colors and my accent colors are blue because they're the complementary colors. Now, this is the sort of thing that Adobe Colors does really well because you can choose the different options. They allow you to pick colors that are complementary or, well, they call them compound colors and maybe shades or triads. Now, what I find with the Adobe website is sometimes they will generate colors that I think don't go well together. I know mathematically they should, but to my eye, they don't really go that well together. I find they clash a little bit. And that's one of the reasons why I like choosing my palettes using Coolers, because I find that their AI, whatever they use, is a lot better. But both of them do work. But yeah, I would just study a little bit of color theory and find out what complementary, trying to think of the terminology, kind of the colors next to each other on the wheel and that sort of thing. What works well? And sometimes it's just a matter of eyeballing it. When I'm picking 5 colors, I'll often know what my first color is and have an idea what the second color is. But the other colors, sometimes they come to me just as I'm choosing through. I'll be sitting there with the color palette picker and Coolers and just pressing the space bar until all of a sudden a color pops up. And I'll go, oh, that's not a color I would have thought of, but it works really well with the 2 colors that I've already picked. And then I'll lock it in and then see what else comes about. And sometimes I'll end up unlocking that one and changing it later on if something else maybe changes my mind or whatever. But in theory, I usually pick, like say for a website, I will pick my main color, a complementary color, then I'll pick a darker color, then I'll pick a lighter color, and then the 5th color or 6th color is kind of just thrown in there, either a second light or a second dark. And that's kind of the way I do it. So I don't know if that's if there's really a rule of thumb to that. I guess each person is a little bit different, and that's why everybody creates their things a little bit differently. But that's what I do. I tend to choose more the earth and natural tones. I much rather build a website in browns and greens, in grays, than I will with reds or yellows and stuff like that. I have done them in the other colors, but given the choice, if there isn't an existing color palette to work off of, I tend to go more with the neutral tones, the earth tones myself. And there are tons of resources out there. I've used images before just to draw colors from. I mentioned the color palettes generator by CSS Drive. I have used that before when I've had a photo and I really like the colors from it and just throw it in and see what colors it can pull from that photo. And I've based websites on those colors as well before. So I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for, Landon, but that's the way I work whenever I'm choosing my colors. And so far it's done me well over the years. Very, very rarely will I have a client come back and go, ooh, I really don't like that color on the website. Actually, I'm trying to think back and I don't remember ever having that happen. So I must be doing something right. So thank you very much for that question. Now, if you would like to have me answer your question in a future episode of the podcast, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/feedback and submit your question there. Now, I received a bunch of iTunes reviews this week. I'm only going to read one here. This one came in from I Am Nassau from the USA, and it says, The Graphic Design Podcast. I've been a home-based graphic designer for about 6 years. Once a week, I make a 5-hour drive to get to seminary, and every now and then, I'd put on a random podcast to get me through the drive. About 2 months ago, I came across the Resourceful Designer podcast, and it has seriously changed my life. I've been struggling to get my business off the ground and achieve the goals that I set for myself by getting consistent design business. But ever since I began listening, I've had such a boost in confidence that I'm sure it's part of the reason why I've been getting so much new business lately. Mark, you are the man. The advice you give and those great resources of the week have taken my design business to a whole new level. Sometimes when I'm feeling overwhelmed or having a creative block, I simply play one of your podcasts and my spirit is renewed, propelling me back into my home office and back to work. Thank you so much for blessing me and other designers with such a valuable gem. As I said before, you are the man. Please keep them coming. Oh, well, thank you very much for that review. And I got a little bit of a lump in my throat there after that one. As I said, I did get a few. I've got 2 more reviews that I'll read in future episodes of the podcast, but that doesn't mean I don't want you to keep them coming. If you would like to leave a review for the podcast, simply visit resourcefuldesigner.com/iTunes, which will redirect you to the iTunes store in your country where you can leave a review. Now, I want to take a quick minute just to thank everybody who is supporting Resourceful Designer on Patreon. It means so much to me that you are parting with your money, your hard-earned income, in order to help support the show. And it doesn't matter if it's just $1 a month, I appreciate it. Every dollar helps me cover the costs of putting this podcast out, of the hosting for the website, the hosting for the media files, of my time, of everything I have to pay in order to put out this content for you. So thank you to everybody who is already supporting the podcast. And if you would like to become a supporter of Resourceful Designer, visit resourcefuldesigner.com/Patreon. That's Patreon. And for as little as $1 a month, you too could support the podcast. So that's it for this week's episode. Before I go, I want to remind you one more time of the resource of the week, which is Coolors, a super fast color scheme generator that you can find by visiting Coolors, COOLORS.co. So that's it for this week. Thank you so much for sticking in till the end of the episode. I do appreciate you. But it's time for me to get back to work. So I am Mark Dakot, wishing you all the best with your graphic design business. And as always, reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.